by Health Freedom Ireland in conjunction with the Irish Inquiry is to promote debate on issues relating to health in Ireland. We would like to make it quite clear that we have no agenda beyond seeking to present all sides of an argument so that you, the public, can make up your own minds about how you want to live your lives. Much of the material you will see on this programme is not available through mainstream channels, so if you want to support us and spread the word, just press the share button on your screens. When it comes to the disease known as COVID-19, there are many, many topics to discuss. At the moment, in particular, there's much talk of ivermectin, if I'm pronouncing it right, an anti-parasitical drug which helps stall the progress of the illness if you get it on time. Next week, that's going to be the focus of our discussion, so please remember that. We're going to have a good one then. Not that this isn't going to be great as well. It's worth pointing out, however, quite emphatically, that the vast majority of the Irish population have no personal experience of COVID-19. Only fewer than 94% of the population have never tested positive, as it's called. What most people know of the disease comes from the daily doom bulletins on RTE and, of course, from the scary yellow signs everywhere. If you didn't watch television, you would barely know that there was anything going on. What is affecting every family in the country are the lockdowns, and specifically the closure of schools. For the past 9 months, children of all ages have been deprived not only of their education, but also of the vital framework that allows them to develop as human beings. Schools are places where children socialise and develop emotionally, plus for many, they're a safe refuge from fairly disastrous family situations. Parents, it's not just the children that are suffering. Parents are struggling to combine homeschooling with working from the upstairs bedroom, basically. With no creches open, they can't rely on grandparents, as we know, or on other family members to provide childcare. Schools, there are, of course, people who have to go to work. That's the nurses, the guards, the people in the shops. And they're the people in particular who can no longer rely on the backup of their families. So it's a disaster all around. We all know the dangers of spending too much time online, and yet children now are spending more time indoors online than ever before. This at a time when we have a crisis in childhood obesity. Plus, children are being bombarded every single day with frightening messages, encouraging them to think that every other human being on the planet is a threat to their health in some ways, and that they themselves could unwittingly kill granny or granddad. There's plenty of evidence to support the view that schools should never have been shut down. A review of 17 countries conducted by the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control found that reopening schools last September could not be blamed for the resurgence of the virus, which is seasonal, as we know. It would have happened anyway. What is absolutely not in doubt is that the negative physical, mental and educational effects of school closures on children totally outweigh any benefits of closing down the schools. Nor is there any evidence of teachers being a particular risk. So we're setting the stage here now. Our guests today, we're starting today with two guests who will set the scene for us, who are at the front line. One is a teacher, Paddy O'Reilly, and the other a pupil, because we have Brandon on as a special guest. After that, we will speak to Chris Brett, who is multi-talented. She's not only been somebody who analyses the effects of medicines and medical procedures on people and other things that we can hear about. She also is homeschooling two small children or two younger children, and she's co-founder of an organisation called Us for Them, which is campaigning to end the closure of schools in England. So right, we'll start with you, Paddy. What's life been like since last March?
It's been interesting. If you're not good at technology, you've had to get up. You have to up speed very, very quickly. So it's interesting from that alone. I think in a few years' time, people will be far more tech savvy, and when the world returns to normal, that'll be useful. Right now, it's probably overwhelming for a lot of people. But away from COVID and away from the present method of schooling, I would think we'll look back on this and we'll be more tech savvy, which will be helpful if we use it correctly. I think it's particularly or who don't have the devices, and I think that's a massive problem. I think that would probably be the divide among the poor and the richer kids would be exacerbated by that.
So when exactly did the first lockdown start, or the first closure of the schools?
March the 12th, just before Paddy's Day.
And it went on until?
Oh, gosh, Brandon, you might remember better than me, but did we get back to school before the summer at all, Brandon? No, we didn't.
No, we had the whole summer off then.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I should know myself. Sorry.
I think the engagement this time around on online is better, but nowhere near satisfactory in my opinion.
How do you mean by engagement online? In
that the first time around, neither teachers nor pupils were ready for this kind of learning. And right now, when a teacher does a Microsoft Teams or a Zoom class or a Google Meets class, there's more engagement from the pupils in that they're more up to speed, they're more tech savvy, they're less afraid of it. Likewise, the teachers. So we're learning as we go along as well on that, if that was your question, Linda.
Yeah, well, Brandon, we'll bring you in now. How have you found it? So what happened really was that schools were shut down from March till September, which was the longest summer holidays you ever had, right? In your young. I mean, how did you cope with that? I mean, did you find it boring?
It was kind of a mix of everything, to be honest. As Paddy was saying, no one was really prepared. And, with that comes difficulty, and with no devices. Like, only recently, I was able to get a proper device, like a laptop that I was able to use to go onto the Meets or the Zoom classes. Whereas before, I was using my phone, and it's better than nothing, but it's still like it's a compact device, and just to get on with your work and stuff, it's really distracting, as well as when you have all your other social media or games on it, etc. It was quite difficult.
So you're in a leaving cert year, right?
Yeah.
So are you worried about what's going to happen in the next few months?
Very, to be honest, because I think this year's 6 years have had the most difficulty, because we missed out on our 5th year, the majority of it anyway, which was what some people would say the most important year of the leaving cert cycle, whereas 6th year is more revision and stuff. And then when we went back into the schools, we were using this 6th year as like the actual learning, whereas we would have been using it as revising.
That would have been in September.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I ask Brandon something?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, Brandon. Just with regard to across the different your friends in the leaving cert year, like would there be different pupils who aren't engaging at all? Would there be some pupils who'd be engaging well? Would there be some pupils almost thinking about dropping out? Would there be some pupils totally disengaged? If you broke it.
I think like a good mix of what you were saying in general, because like what it's like during school as well, people have them kind of thoughts of dropping out or not engaging with homework that's given out, whether it's online or not. So with the extra not being in school and having to do stuff from home in your own room, and not really have any like you're kind of repeating the days. So if anything, it's kind of enhancing the stress and the kind of thoughts of dropping out or like not doing the work or not engaging. Yeah.
Have there been, among your peers as well, have there been trouble with, say, mental health issues, with maybe youngsters starting to drink, this kind of thing?
I don't think. Well, from my friends, I don't think there's any like um this hasn't been the cause to any start to drink or anything. I think that may be prior or something that
Yeah,
was bound to happen anyway.
yeah.
Um, that's just personally with my friends, but I'm sure like anywhere there has been definitely a change in how people have reacted, responded, and how they act now because of this.
So, what's your average day like now, a school day? What do you do?
Well, I'd usually get up, have my breakfast, look at the emails. If there's a call that I need to attend, I'll go to that. Then usually have like a break, and then like look at the rest of the emails of the work, and then yeah, to go from there.
So, how many classes do you have in a day?
Well, fortunately enough, my school has done a timetable.
Right, all right.
So we'd have our base subjects, English, Irish, Maths on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then the options in between.
Right.
I know that some schools would almost follow their timetable to a T. So my wife teaches in a school that there'd be a lot of pressure on. It's just it'd be quite an academic. There'd be a lot
Yeah.
of academic streams in the school, so they would follow their normal timetable. So there'd be tremendous pressure there on teachers because basically, the pressure that we all have feel on Zoom because it's quite intense. Looking at a camera, how are you looking, checking back yourself and all this. It's not the same as just chatting to someone.
No.
So they could have 6 or 7, they could have 8 or 9 classes in a row. Now I know one subject that might suffer there would actually be PE,
Oh, yeah.
and I do feel there was it's something that you said in your introduction, Lindy. I thought there was a wonderful opportunity here for the government to help PE, help healthy issues, because we have an outdoors. They could have actually asked schools, I felt, when we went back in September, to put on extra PE, because if you're out in the fresh air, it's more COVID compliant. It's better for you. I think there should almost been an obesity tackling thing overnight because of COVID, and there was a wonderful opportunity missed. Rather than some schools actually closed their PE halls to make extra PE classrooms.
What?
Yeah, no, that was quite common because you couldn't fit so many people in a classroom.
Oh, yeah.
So some schools put the overflow of children in the PE hall, rather than saying, can every school not do extra PE? I thought it was a wonderful opportunity missed. And I think a lack of imagination and a lack of sort of bravery among the the government and the political powers, and that lack of imagination more. I think they're well intentioned, but I thought there was great opportunities missed.
Right, I'm going to bring Chris in now. Chris, what kind of damage do you think that what's going on will do to students?
Well, I mean, we already know from the first lockdown the damage that has been done. I mean, sadly, we've got 75 studies now on harms, 25 of those studies from the UK. Wide-ranging harms, from the amount of mental health issues going from 1 in 9 children in 2017 to 1 in 6 in 2020. We know that calls to abuse hotlines have soared, like the NSPCC, and at the same time, referrals through safeguarding agencies have fallen 30 to 40%. We know that children who started back at school in September, Year 7 children, were already estimated to be 22 months behind in learning. And on average, it was 6 months behind already in learning. And we know that the children who are the most affected, of course, are the most vulnerable children, who, despite schools in England being open for those children to access, 92% of them didn't access those schools in the first lockdown. So we're failing a whole generation of children. And it's not just about the educational harms, it's also about the development, the social development. I think, Patrick's right. Schools have got their act together much better this time round in terms of the online provision, But that's really not good enough. That's not education. Children don't learn from sitting behind a screen at school. We can't just transplant them as if they're office workers, back home and expect them to have the same learning experience. They learn through doing, the lab experiments, the practical work. They learn from working with their peers. And, the teachers need to check their understanding, and they can't possibly do that via a screen.
Right. Here's another thing that I'm hoping to cover as many bases as possible. The role of the teaching unions. What do you think, Paddy, here in Ireland? Do you think they should have been braver, as you're saying, or less brave?
Well, no, I didn't. I don't think I mentioned them before now, Lindy.
No.
The role of the teachers' unions. I find the teachers' unions are second guessing. I think there's we're all relatively insecure as people, but in the light of they're almost afraid what the public might say on different issues, and the public is usually, RTE, the Irish Times, and a few other people. Now, I'm not against what they're saying. That's not my point. My point is that people sort of. I think there's been a lack of debate. I think that's probably the biggest issue: a lack of debate and a lack of imagination. So I don't think the teachers' unions were particularly. I wouldn't have blamed them really for any of their roles in this, to be honest.
Well, for Chris's benefit, explain what happened last week with our Minister for Education.
Yeah, I think basically there was talk of the special needs kids needing to get back, and the I suppose to summarise it, there was quite a lot of political opinion saying we need to get the special needs kids back, but on the other side, if we are in the middle of a pandemic and some of the SNAs or the teachers that might be teaching these special needs kids are living with, for example, their mother or their father. So you might have a teacher who's 50 living with his or her grandmother or whatever. That teacher wouldn't have felt safe. So I think there was a knock-on effect right around there that, if it's not safe for that person to go back in and teach, how are we going to get teachers and SNAs in to teach the special needs kids? And while I find the whole debate very interesting, I know last year in Ireland, will I keep talking?
Yeah. But Chris, you can interrupt him at any point.
No, seriously, interrupt me, Chris. Seriously, I'm married, so I'm used to being interrupted. But last year in Ireland, the death toll was 31,500 approximately, right? Whereas, the previous year. Whereas last year, the year of COVID 2020, it was less than that, significantly less. I think my guess is around 29,000. The figures aren't out yet. So that meant there was a slightly less death toll in Ireland last year despite COVID, right? Now, that's not to say there was no COVID. That's not my point. My point is that there's been very little debate about it, both in teaching, what we could have done differently. Could we have had more outdoor classes? Could we have had outdoor classes that then could be used as outdoor restaurants at the weekends? That we could set up, the whole place. Our country is so behind in terms of the facilities that you have in England, believe it or not, like outdoor table tennis. You could have done so many things outdoor with, a couple of hundred structures that might have cost very, very little. And the billions that we're spending on things, there's so much we could have done and still could be doing that would help both education, help physical health, and still mind COVID. That would be my opinion.
So, Chris, what's
that? Yeah, I mean, I think you're right.
Yeah, go on.
I think you're right, and I think what happened in England is that we shut even the outdoor sports facilities. Outdoor gyms are closed, tennis courts are closed, golf courses are closed. So it's ridiculous. All of the children's activities have closed. All of their sport, which is so important for their physical and mental well-being, and as Paddy said, they shut the school PE halls because they set them all up to be testing centres, and then they decided they weren't going to test them, and now perhaps they are going to test them if they go back. But actually, children need that structure in their life, not just for their own well-being, but just for their sanity. And given that obesity is the number one risk factor other than age for this, a poor outcome in COVID is obesity, and yet all the measures that are taking are actually adding to that risk. It just doesn't make any logical sense to me from a perspective of looking at the interventions that we're taking, that we're imposing on an entire generation of children. It makes no sense at all.
Can I ask Chris something? Yeah. What's the level of, I find here in Ireland that a journalist either wants to work in the Irish Times or the RTE, and if they don't work in those, they're afraid to tackle them a bit, right? Maybe that's a bit simplistic. All I'm asking is, what's the level of debate like in England?
There has been no debate, and that's what we pushed for when we started Us for Them back in May, is that no one was representing the views of children. We heard very, very clearly from the unions for the teachers, but we didn't hear anybody speaking up for the children. And we wrote to every single children's charity. We wrote to the Children's Commissioner. We wrote to all the people that are charged with, putting the children's interests at heart in England. But the debate in mainstream media has been non-existent. I mean, now it's starting to turn a little bit. We're getting reports. We had the report today on the BBC about the abuse that children have been suffering, about children aged 10 to 13 at the highest level of self-harming. These things are now coming out, but there's been no debate at all. And if you dared to question the narrative, that your voice just wasn't heard. We've had a struggle really to get into any kind of representation in the mainstream media, because people, there was this kind of view that we all had to kind of batten down the hatches and do it for the good of the NHS in England. And of course, that's clearly not working. So, I think people are turning a bit.
Can I ask Brandon there something? Brandon, can you hear me?
Yeah, go on.
I know the incidence of COVID is meant to be relatively high in Ballymun at the moment, and that, how, like in terms of old people who are suffering in hospital, I know some of the pupils have mums and dads with it. So, how are the young people behaving? What do they think about it? What are
It's kind of a tough one. I think some people are very strict with it and like they follow the guidelines, etc. But I think some people are very on the other side of the spectrum, completely irresponsible. Like I've seen people like close to me, as in area wise, like going to parties with like maybe 50 plus people, stuff like that. It's very, I don't think they kind of understand the precautions, because the whole kind of narrative is like that it's the older people that are suffering from it, and if they have family close to them that are relatively young and they don't really see their grandparents or whatever, they're kind of like, oh well, I'm okay, I don't need to follow this.
Okay.
But can I ask you, Brandon, do you genuinely believe that what's going on is a serious pandemic?
Yeah, because even just with the topic of the schools, I'm like, right as of right now, I'm not attending school, like physically. And with last year, the lockdown, like it's such a extreme like level of like what's going on. I'm like, I potentially mightn't have a sit down exam that I like actually like do on my own accord.
Yeah.
If you get me.
I
don't. Go on.
I was just going to say, sorry, I thought the pictures, what frightened me most was probably the pictures from the New York hospitals, because New York is a very, very high incidence of it, and the pictures from North Italy early on.
I think, well, as Chris was saying, there's been absolutely no debate, and this is what we're here for, because we now know that there's no black and white, there's no right and wrong. What we do know is that the main problem is not being caused by a virus, which viruses come and go all the time. The main problem is how it's being reacted to and treated. For instance, in Italy, the main problem initially in Italy, because they're a disaster, they're like Ireland, there's the trolleys every single year. I mean, it's funny that people don't remember it's the same every winter in the hospitals. But in Italy, the problem was exacerbated because a lot of the carers just scarpered. They just left. And they left the old people in the hospitals to die, with the result we saw those awful photographs. But in other words, there's every single country, I think, has a different approach and a different way of looking at it. And what we need to have here is for young people like you, Brandon, to look at it and to question people like us who have forced you into the situation you're in. Would you agree with me, Paddy?
No.
Go on.
No, I think I'd be caught. I'd have no problem saying I think there is a pandemic, right? And on the other side, I'd have no problem saying in that there's been a lack of imagination, there's been a lack of open debate in dealing with the pandemic. And like, I think most winters, the flu is around and very serious and might even be killing more. But that's not to say, and I thought this COVID was a wonderful opportunity for us to tackle the flu better, because a lot of the measures that you take, whether it's vitamin D or wearing your mask properly or hand sanitizing, were wonderful measures to also tackle the flu. So I would like to have seen that debated. And I'd also like to see the exact figures, what Chris mentioned there, a brilliant point that one of the, Chris might be able to help us on this, but obesity is an underlying condition for COVID-19. And wouldn't that be a wonderful debate, to say to the Brandon's generation, at least don't be obese starting now. But we're not really giving them that message. We're saying stay at home and stay online. That's the message they're getting. And I would think, why not do loads of individual sports? So let's say, okay, we don't agree fully, me and Lindy, on whether there should be team sports or not, but we do agree that kids could be out running and cycling, and gives kids free bikes and take some of the teachers' money off them or whatever, but just get us all out exercising. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity if we could turn this around on its head. Like, Chris, what you said about the obesity earlier, I'd love to hear some of your opinions on the other underlying conditions that maybe aren't being mentioned, or your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, we know that obesity is, the biggest comorbidity for a lot of conditions, not just COVID. And the other big factor with COVID is age. You can't do anything about your age, but you can do something about your weight. You can do something about your BMI. And I think what's been shocking is that the public health messages that I've seen from all the governments have been about, staying in and hiding away, instead of saying, actually, you need to look after yourself. You need to sort your immune system out, and you need to, you need to stay healthy in this. And, the fact that they've shut all the facilities, even the outdoor ones, to me is nothing short of criminal, really, because they're actually preventing people from doing that. And, we're limited about the amount of time we can go out to exercise, only once a day, which is, really, people haven't got, an awful lot else to do. I know that the children here have been, criticised a lot for being out and about, but actually the kids are down the park, on the skate park, or they're running around the field, with a football. I have no problem with that. They're in the fresh air. They're at much lower risk anyway as a younger generation, and they're outside and they're doing exercise far better than being sat at home on a screen. And they need that interaction. But I think the kind of the shaming that's going on about people not following the rules isn't actually helpful. And we have a series of terrible adverts now in the UK saying, have you kept your distance? Look this person in the eye. There's a picture of somebody on a ventilator. That kind of messaging is not really helping people, because it's just scaring people, rather than saying, actually, you will do much better if you look after yourself, and if you take vitamin D, and you get out and you get fresh air and you have a sensible diet and all the rest of it. They're much better messages for not just COVID-19, but for a wide range of illnesses for which obesity is an underlying risk factor.
Okay, thanks.
In schools now, is there any emphasis on? There is, of course, there is, on living healthier lives and diet and so on. Yeah. I mean, is there an obesity problem in your school?
There's not a massive one, Brandon. I don't think, is there? I think.
No.
No, I don't think.
No, I wouldn't have noticed it myself.
No.
I think I think our school definitely is putting a bit more of an emphasis on it due to COVID. Like this year they brought in movement breaks.
Oh, yeah.
So near the end of the class, we'll go for a lap or two around the school, which is 10-15 minutes of a walk, and you get your bit of fresh air.
That was That was from September, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, in fact, Linda, you popped it into one of the local newspapers first, which is brilliant. But I thought you could have had any number of initiatives like that. You could have had, you could have teach certain subjects through PE. You could have teach maths through PE and have them outdoor more often. You could have. So no, I think our school was very conscious of it.
But the problem, of course, now is that in the lockdown now, what I've noticed myself, since I do teach a class myself, in orienteering online, can you imagine? Anyway, yes, it's a bit of a challenge. But what I have noticed, that I think people are very weary of what's going on, and I just wonder. What was happening from September to December. I think individual schools did use their imagination to some degree and did try and get students out. But what's happening now is you're all at home. So how are they being encouraged to? How are students being encouraged to stay fit and get outdoors?
Yeah, I think that's a problem for all schools and a problem nationally, and I don't think it's been quite addressed. I think we're all putting keep fit classes online. But I wonder about that. Because I know myself, if I was to, I find it hard enough to go for, and I like keeping fit, to go for a jog by myself. To me, it has to be a game with a few mates, and that's the way I've always sort of kept fit. And once you take that away from, people who are into games, then it's tough. But I think it could have been replaced by, games like table tennis, volleyball. Imagine if you set up lots of volleyball courts around. They keep their distance playing that. Keep their distance playing soccer, tennis. They keep their distance cycling. They keep their distance jogging. There's any number of games that we could have introduced on a nationwide basis. I actually find when young foreign kids come to our school, and that quite often they have better fundamental movement skills than Irish kids. They're better at 4 or 5 sports. Because their primary education system would be better. We don't have PE teachers in our primary schools in Ireland, whereas in most countries they do. And I thought there was wonderful opportunities missed. Chris, it would be possible to have both messages going out, both the healthy messages you're talking about and the stay safe messages that are constant.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the issues I have with the stay safe message is this idea that schools aren't safe. And I think we have to define what we mean by safe, because for a lot of children, home is not safe. And I think for me, it's about the relative risk and benefits of both the of the lockdown and of the virus. And I don't deny that there's a virus, but I think, as Lindy says, it's the reaction to it that I have a problem with, because we're not imposing systems that are actually doing very much to control this virus by all accounts. In England, we still have 100,000 people dead. We still have, high rates of it. So for all the measures that we're doing, we're actually putting children at risk of other harms. And we're actually not doing what we say we're trying to do, which is to protect the vulnerable. So that's my big problem with it, is that actually it's the idea that actually by locking up healthy people, we're going to protect vulnerable people, and that's just not true. And that's not true. That's not been seen to be the case in any countries. And you can look at countries like Sweden, who haven't closed primary schools. You can look at countries like Norway, who've done extensive contact tracing studies and found out that it's not the children driving the infection. So I think it's really difficult when that fear is used as a way to contain everybody, rather than actually giving some individual responsibility for health. And I think as a nation, that's where we're particularly bad, I think, in the UK with the National Health Service. We think it's somebody else's problem. We're not taking responsibility. Look at Nordic countries like the Dutch, like Norway, like Sweden. They take much more responsibility for themselves, for their health. And I think that's perhaps a message that we need to now get out to young people, to say, actually, it's not just about hiding away from not getting sick. It's also about staying healthy. So if you do get sick, you maximise your chance for a better outcome.
There's also the problem, though, isn't there, that we've become a very risk-averse people or society. mainly caused by, I would say, insurance. The fact that we think, for some reason, we think that we can insure against every risk in this life. Whereas I think we all know that if you want to have fun in this life, you've got to take a risk. And that's another thing that I wish, this don't. I mean, I just find the government messages now are a complete turn off for me. I don't listen to them at all. If they came out and said, look at lads, it's getting better, the thing is going down, the bump or the slope or whatever it is. But as you're saying, Paddy, and you're both saying, Chris, live a healthy life, look after yourselves. It's your responsibility. I just feel that the negativity is extremely corrosive, I think is the word, on us all.
I definitely agree with your point there about becoming a risk-averse society, and the more I hear health and safety mentioned, I generally feel the person who's saying it hasn't health and safety in mind. It's almost what boxes do I tick, what regulations do I follow? Yeah. But generally those people are also well-intentioned. So I think it's, they don't mean anything bad by it. It's just we're caught in that system at the minute. And I just think we need to have open debates about it. And that's my issue. My issue is not whether it's a pandemic or not. My issue is about the lack of debate. And I think the governments, and I think they're well-intentioned on this, are actually afraid of that if they give out the message, be outside a lot 3 or 4 times a day, get lots of exercise, that they're afraid that will be a mixed message. I think that's their fear.
Chris, what would you say? I'm going to stick in my spoke here and say, I just wish they would give us credit for being intelligent and sensible human beings. I resent the fact that we're all treated as if we're 5-year-olds. Would you agree, Chris, or what do you think?
I do agree, and I think the danger is that we're now breeding a generation of children who are terrified of everybody and think that they're a threat to everybody, and that's massively dangerous psychologically for them. And it's also not helping them to assess risk, by saying, this idea that behave as if you've got the virus. Well, most people haven't got the virus. At top level in the community here, it's 2%. So we shouldn't be behaving like we've all got the virus. That's not a sensible message. And so we're breeding now people who feel, you hear people saying, but I did everything right and I've tested positive. Well, it's a virus. Viruses are designed to get into human cells. That's what they do. That's their job. It's not about not doing everything right. So I think it's also about looking at the relative risk. You've got, I've spent 30 years looking at interventions and saying, what are the benefits of this and what are the harms of this? And all we've had, heard about, with this is we have to lock down to prevent the virus, but we don't talk about what the impact of those lockdowns or the impact of the school closures will be. And yes, we might reduce, some of the deaths, but if we're causing deaths because children aren't getting to hospital for cancer treatment, if people aren't being admitted, with heart attacks, where's the greater good here? We have to have a proper, grown-up debate about it and not just focus myopically on one single risk. I think there's a massive danger there.
You said to me before that what hasn't been done is a risk assessment of any of the policies. Could it have been done? No. Could it have been done?
Of course it could have been done. We've been asking for it since May. SAGE themselves in their minutes suggested that it was needed in March, and yet none has been forthcoming. There's been no sound assessment of what these risks are. There's just been, these models coming out looking at, if X happens, then Y might do this. But there's not been any proper assessment of what the overall risks and benefits are of this strategy and what the overall costs are of the different strategies. And not just, monetary costs, but, costs to human life, because there's going to be an awful lot of a knock-on effect of this for many years to come in terms of unemployment. And when we, bringing it back to the schools debate, if the children who weren't able to take exams last year and aren't able to take exams perhaps this year, where does that leave us, in a few years' time for teachers and for doctors and for so on, because we're not going to have given that generation the education they need. And I don't think it's just about the exam years. I think all the years are behind because all the learning builds on that fundamentally. And even the schools that are providing, online lessons from 9 to 3, they recognise that that's not, they can't deliver 50% of the curriculum that way. So everyone is going to be, playing catch up for a very long time to come. And I think, we can't just, let our focus be solely on one risk when there's all these other risks out there as well.
There's the one thing, Lindy, that you said. I try and make a policy of not agreeing with you too much. Is that okay? But there's one thing that you did say there. I do think we're able for a nuanced debate, and I'd include the young people on this. Like I'm reading 2 or 3 books at a time, because there's a certain book I read before I go to sleep. I don't read a sports book before I go to sleep. I read fiction, and then you're watching 3 or 4 series on television. You're reading a couple of newspapers. I think I would agree with you that we are able to handle a nuanced debate. And I don't think we've had that. I think the government are underestimating our intelligence. I don't think we ever overestimate theirs, but I do think we could handle a nuanced debate.
But in your school, are you managing to get through the curriculum? Or,
I wouldn't worry as much as. To me, it's more Chris's point about the lack of engagement. I don't know how important learning missing 6 months of maths is, because it's a relatively level playing field come the Leaving Cert. I know our point earlier, some kids won't be able to engage in the device and all that. To me, it's not the actual curricular content, it's more the extracurricular stuff that you learn from on the way home from school, on the way into school, the relationships you form with other pupils, the people you meet from other areas, the school trips. Like we every year, Brandon included, we would have gone to St. Mirren, Scotland, for the Scottish Football Club for the last couple of years, Chris, and we would have visited a school in Scotland, in Paisley, and this year we're trying to do it through pen pals, that we link up the kids through pen pals, and it just doesn't feel right, and that's the kind of thing they're missing out on.
Brandon, could you come in there? What do you think you're missing out on?
As Paddy said, and what Chris was saying before, I think we're kind of fortunate that we're like, this is happening, well, as fortunate as we can be, that this is happening in the last years of our school time, whereas others are coming into it and they're having to stay away from their friends or the new people that they would want to become friends with, and like lacking that social experience that you kind of look back on when you're not in school and think that's what I miss about school.
What's happening with the first years, come to think of it, this year's first years?
That's a good point, Brandon.
Yeah,
actually,
it's a very good point.
The exam classes, but it might be the first years that are just settling into school, and they find school the hardest, and now they're not making friends because they're not mixing day in, day out. That's a good point.
What's happening with the first years?
Well, I can't imagine the first years being back before Paddy's Day, whatever about Brandon's year group, but Brandon's year group might be back after midterm. I can't imagine the first years being back before Paddy's Day. That'd be my opinion.
But did they come in September? What happened? Oh yeah, they came in September. Yeah, right. So they had a bit of an introduction to school life anyway.
Yeah.
Well, that's something.
See, my daughter's in that situation. She started secondary school in September, so she's had a term of secondary school, but she hasn't been in a science lab. She hasn't been, in the sports facility. She hasn't been in the computer lab. She hasn't been in the cooking room. Those are all kind of things that I accept. It's a level playing field to some degree, although I think there are big gaps now between the more privileged children and the less privileged children in terms of learning. But those kind of experiences you don't ever get a second chance at, going on the school bus, meeting your friends, getting into your peer groups, the kind of interrelation with other year groups. There's been no mixing at all in the UK between different year groups. So there's not that kind of buddy system. There's not the kind of people that you meet maybe because you're in a sports team or you're in a drama club with them, or there's none of that going on. And I think that's going to have a massive impact because they're going to become quite insular, these children. I mean, it's quite terrifying anyway, starting a big school, and they're not actually getting that kind of encouragement and that support from a screen. They don't know. She doesn't know her friends well enough to maintain those friendships in this situation.
Yeah. Right. Well, we're galloping on here. What can we hope for in the next few months? Start with you, Paddy. What do you reckon is going to happen?
Education-wise, I'd reckon the 6 years will be back. My opinion, the 6 years will be back shortly after midterm, which in Ireland here is I think it's the 24th or 25th of February. I reckon they'll bring back some of the special educational needs children also around then, and they might bring back the third years. My guess is they'll definitely bring the primary school kids back because the childcare issue, plus they probably reckon they're less likely to carry COVID. I think there will be a Leaving Cert exam.
Really?
I think there would be because the teachers haven't built up much of, I think Chris made the point earlier, much paperwork to award predicted grades for the likes of Brandon and that. Now I know Brandon is submitting all his homework all the time, so we've a lot from Brandon, but there'll be a lot of his peers that mightn't have
I hope that's true, Brandon.
We'll get it tomorrow anyway. But we don't have the work built up to award them fair predicted grades, so I think teachers would find it hard. They might have to do it, and there might be some innovative solution that we haven't talked about yet that might come out, but I would think there will be a Leaving Cert exam. Yeah.
What happened, or how did it work out for admittance to colleges this year or last September?
There was a repeat Leaving Cert for anyone who wanted to. Late October, early November. I saw a girl interviewed tonight about her grades, so they had to postpone college for a year. The ones who repeated their Leaving Cert who weren't happy, and then there were some children caught in the system who didn't get fair marks, and again that's an issue that I would feel hasn't been covered well either.
So, Chris, in England, I've heard I was reading today proposals of extending the school year and making longer days and all sorts. Do you know anything about that?
I mean, there's all these ideas being bandied around, but nothing's been, officially announced yet. We know they've said that schools won't go back before the 8th of March here, which is, shocking, quite frankly, that not even primary schools are going to go back after half term. And I think, the way it works is that we read about it in the papers and then it gets announced. So I guess if you've been reading about it, that might well happen. But we haven't had anything official in terms of what's going to happen.
Chris, what would your feeling on, let's say if there's a family of 3 or 4 and they happen to be minded by their grandparent and he was over 80, so she would be very vulnerable. So should those children be kept home from school or not? I still don't know the answer to this in my own head, so I'm not trying to catch you out. I don't know what. If someone's living with people who are vulnerable and they're mixing a lot, let's say if someone like Brandon and he's living at home, should that person be kept home from school or any thoughts?
I think these are very difficult decisions, aren't they, Paddy? They really are. And I think every family should be trusted to make the decisions. Personally, for me, my mum's 80, but she's a robust octogenarian. She's been out in Ethiopia for the last 10 years, so I wouldn't have a problem at all with my children seeing her. And I think this idea that we're going to protect everybody from death is slightly worrying, because actually it's the one thing that's sure for all of us ultimately. And I think what's living?
Yes.
Living is actually loving and seeing these people. I've lost a lot of people very young, so I wouldn't ever miss out on seeing people. Because I think the thing is, you never know when somebody's, you're going to lose somebody, sadly. So I think, everyone has to make that decision themselves. I think protecting the vulnerable by all means, but I don't think we should enforce, keeping healthy children out of school, because there are other risks that, might come up.
Okay, so you were sort of saying that if they're living with someone vulnerable, but there's other issues for whatever, within that family, just trust their judgment. And yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to trust people's judgment, don't we? Because they know their own situations, and I know a lot of families here now are at breaking point. They're in desperate situations, and it's not a solution. Russ Viner, the president of the Royal College of Paediatricians and Child Health, said when we close schools, we closed children's lives, and we did. We took everything away from them in terms of their structure and their support. And I don't think people can underestimate how unsettling that is for some children now. They thought they'd gone back to school in September and then they shut again. I think there's going to be a massive issue with some children getting them back to school because
I was asking, Brandon, would you agree with Chris there? Like, will we struggle getting some pupils back, do you think?
Definitely, especially in my kind of like the year I'm because it's like the last year, and people are kind of.
But surely it's the last hurdle. Surely 6th year, I'm done.
Yeah, that's how I'd view it.
Yeah, but there's others that wouldn't.
Because they kind of wouldn't see the point, I guess. Well, like, I can't speak for them, obviously. I see it the way you see it. Like, it's the last hurdle. This is just give it what you can, I guess.
So what are you hoping to do next year when you leave school?
Well, the route I personally want to go down is in sport. So whether that's being a coach or like going to college to study sports, like sports science, sports management. But I guess I'm in kind of a lucky situation where the education isn't the primary source of what I need to like excel in that field.
But do you have to apply for something now? Yeah, I'm just wondering what the logistics are like.
Well, I was talking to my career guidance teacher, and there's like a sports scholarship, so that would be something I'd have to apply for with college. Like, most of my CAO is full of like sports management, sports leisure, stuff like that. So I would need to apply. But yeah, I think it's mainly the same with everyone.
Is that how it's working? Is the CAO all working? That's the college application thing, Chris, by the way.
Yeah, I'd say the careers teachers are particularly busy this time because they're making almost direct contact with the pupils because it's now CAO time or just finished. So our careers teachers in Trinity Comp School would have been busy, even what Brandon was saying there. But I'm sure they're also suffering in that there's not enough individual consultation to make the right decisions either. So while it sounds okay, it's probably not ideal either.
No, it's a very, very, very tough situation. So I think we can wrap it up there. Thank you for we could talk for hours about the whole the role of education in our lives, and I think the fact that the schools have shut down just shows how important schools are, and this has never, ever, ever been done before. They've never shut down schools, never, ever. And
I think we all agree that teachers should probably be paid more. I think that's the main point.
Yes, we completely agree. Yeah, we definitely agree with that. Right, we'll leave it at there. Leave it at that. Sorry, thank you to Paddy, to Brandon, and to Chris for a very stimulating debate. I'd also like to thank Karen O'Hanlon for background work on this particular programme. And as you know, this programme is produced by a team of volunteers. And today we have Sarah, and we have Sarah, yes, we've Steve, we've Danny, we've Connor, and we've Ciara. And so we'd like to thank them for their help tonight. And remember that if you want to help us out, you can actually throw us a few bob via the Irish Inquiry. Danny is pointing at me to say something, I don't know what. But if you want to, I think it's maybe not on the Irish Inquiry site, am I right? Yeah. Anyway, if you want to support us in any way, you can look at the website. And we're also looking for anybody who wants to help out in any way. If you have a talent you might like to, or if you have any opinions or anything, we want to hear you. As I say, we want to hear all voices and all opinions. So next week we'll be looking at ivermectin and those various cures, if they are. So we look forward to that. And in the meantime, we say good night and thank you for watching.